Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. From Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the palatial FYC studio, you're listening to For Your Consideration,
the podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm your host, Dustin Friesenan.
And I'm Mike Josic, and let's give a shout-out to everybody catching the show on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, YouTube, and iTunes. If you're getting the show off of iTunes, we love it if while you're there, you rated and reviewed the show. It only takes a second, but it does a world of good for us, getting us in those Apple algorithms and getting the show in front of the eyes and ears of people who possibly don't know we exist, but should. If you're a regular listener to the show, welcome back. If this is your first time listening to us, be warned, spoilers ahead. So on last week's show, we talked about having a guest and doing the Big Lebowski, and we posted some images on social media with Lebowski. We have watched the film. We have yet to record it. There's been some scheduling shenanigans, so we decided instead to move forward with my next choice, because it was my choice.
Which is...
faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's Superman.
A.K.A. Jor-El 316. For he so loved the earth that he gave his only begotten son, that he who believeth in him would not die, but be saved due to time warp shenanigans.
You do know that the Moses-Jesus parallel is not subtle or unintended.
Oh, I know full well.
Okay. Just in case that dummery was to be like, hey, did you notice all that Christian symbolism? Or Hebrew symbolism? Old Testament.
He does, in the comics, gain the powers of God at some point, to my limited understanding.
Are we talking about All-Star Superman?
I'm talking about not All-Star Superman, but some Superman at some point becomes God effectively, according to some of the random YouTube videos I've seen of overpowered superheroes.
All right, well, seeing as how your cultural knowledge of Superman is...
random and...
at best.
with a lot of source amnesia.
So, yeah, okay, let's do the credits on this quickly so we can jump right into it and talk about Richard Donner's 1978 film, Superman. Superman the movie.
The motion picture. The film.
Directed by Richard Donner, produced by Pierre Spengler. Screenplay was by Mario Puzo, David Newman, Leslie Newman, Robert Benton, but anybody who knows anything knows that Tom Mankiewicz basically kind of wrote the whole thing. Story was by Mario Puzo. It was based on Superman by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. It starred Marlon Brando, Gene Hackman, Christopher Reeve, Ned Beatty, Jackie Cooper, Glenn Ford, Trevor Howard, Margot Kidder, Valerie Perrine, Maria Schell, Terrence Stamp, Phyllis Thaxter, and Susanna York. Music was by John Williams. Cinematography was by Jeffrey Unsworth. It was edited by Stuart Baird and Michael Ellis. It was distributed by Warner Brothers. It was wide release on December 15th, 1978. The film is widely loved, was nominated for several awards, has been inducted into the Library of Congress's National Film Registry for being culturally or aesthetically significant.
And has made it onto BFI's Sight and Sound list of the greatest films of all time, 2012, at 546th on the Director's Poll.
Juan Antonio Bayona was the one director who voted for this film, which makes me happy because I like Juan Antonio Bayona and I like this film.
Yet probably disappoints you that he was the only one.
It surprises me that nobody else has voted this film onto the list. It's true.
But there's so many films that we think should be on the list that aren't on the list, that
this is
are
true.
On the list, that what the hell is this doing here? It's just a 1-minute video of an elephant getting electrocuted. You know, you never know.
Now, this movie, we were actually going to do it last year. Last year was the 40th anniversary of Superman the movie, and as anybody who's a regular listener of the show will know, things kind of went a little wonky in those last 2 months of 2018. So
we will instead say it's the 40th anniversary of it being released on video cassette. Was that around this time?
No.
It going out of theaters?
I saw it 5 years ago at another one of these flashback film festival type things at Cineplex. It was a joy to see it on the big screen. Hadn't seen it on the big screen since I was probably, 5 years old. It's one of the first movies I actually saw in the theater. Pretty cool. But just before we get to the discussion, I wanted to point out what we watched the film on, as I like to do. We watched it on, it was the second disc of the Superman Collector's Edition, Ultimate Collector's Edition, that came out from Warner Brothers back in 2006, in November of 2006. Wonderful set, came in a tin, very cool, had all the movies, it's like 13 discs, documentaries, everything from Superman the movie, different cuts of it, Superman 2, the Donner cut, Singers movies. Yeah, good stuff.
And while we did see the extended version, Mike did point out the scenes that were added because he's that much of a nerd and happened to know every single one as they came up.
It's true. We should point out that we did watch the extended director's cut of the film, so it does have a few additional scenes in it. We're always kind of in a bit of a tug of war, since we're no longer tied into that whole AFI, BFI specific sort of list. When the movie gets voted onto one of these, it's the movie on the Sight and Sound list is Superman 1978.
But which version did the actual critic or director see when Juan Antonio Bayona chose it?
Are they voting, Blade Runner? Are they voting the Blade Runner theatrical with the narration? Or are they voting Blade Runner the director's cut? Or Blade Runner the final cut? Well, it's probably not the final cut, because I don't think the final cut came out in 2012. Maybe it did. But yeah.
I personally like to see any cut that's done by the director that's done with the least amount of producers involved, because producers are there to make money, not make the film, not to make art.
But in some cases...
Some cases, producers do good things. I've read those lists as well.
Now, Spider-Man 2 isn't on any of these lists, but I'm just using it as an example because Sam Raimi put out what he considered his director's cut, which was the theatrical cut. And when it came to DVD, it was selling really well. It was a very popular movie. In my opinion, it's one of the best superhero movies ever made. Sony was like, hey, Sam, could you put some extra stuff in there? And he's like, well, no, I'm already happy with the movie. This is already the movie that I want. And they're like, yeah, but can you put some extra stuff in there? And then we can sell it again. As Spider-Man 2.1. And he's like, okay, sure, fine. So there is this extended cut, but technically the director's cut was the theatrical release. So there are some movies where there is that gray middle ground, but I think it's fair if we just qualify which version we watched.
And if we talk about those specific scenes because they are of great importance, we'll say that was or was not included in whatever version.
And I honestly think since I lived with this movie for many years before I even saw the extended footage, I'm comfortable with my judgment anyways, kind of being grounded in sort of a pure experience.
And my judgment is not colored by those extended scenes.
You already think Superman's a bad idea. So, with that in mind, let's get to the discussion. Dustin, this was your first time watching Superman the movie. What are your first impressions?
I was actually fairly surprised that the effects weren't as bad as I was expecting. I knew there'd be a lot of the green screen flying around, and I've certainly seen bad green screen flying around. Now, I've been told by Mike that this is blue screen, and half the time it's pretty good, and half the time it's super bad.
There's some super good flying in this.
There is some super good flying. Generally, when he's moving around while the background is moving around, it looks really good. But if he's trying to fly anywhere or the rockets are going around and the background is not moving, it looks like garbage. But there's a number of effects that are really well done. There's a number of them that really brought me out of it because I thought they looked so stupid. In particular, him flying with Lois. At first, when he caught her, Mike, you pointed out how you liked how he caught her.
When she falls out of the helicopter off the Daily Planet.
Yeah, and you said how it made sense and how he caught the helicopter too. I think the strength he'd need to grab that helicopter leg would have wrecked the helicopter leg, but whatever. It's different from the whole just hand underneath, which is super cliched at this point. But
he could have caught the... What do you call the... It's not a pontoon, but...
The landing...
Yeah, the landing things... We'll probably Google
landing
this.
Supports. We'll call it the landing support.
He could have just grabbed it from the bottom, but if it was falling and he was flying up, that's just crunch, right? But he grabbed it from the side and he kind of came down with it a bit. So, I mean, it's not perfect, and not everything in this movie is perfect, but there are bits.
But like that wasn't bad.
Richard Donner had this whole idea through making this movie of verisimilitude, where the more realistic you can make it, the more you're going to believe the silliness of it. The more you just sort of get rolled into it. So moments like that, or moments like when he's flying with Lois, which is ridiculous, but...
That was too ridiculous.
But
him
when
catching
they're flying,
all the stuff, I didn't question.
They don't talk to each other. And it's not just that they're not talking to each other because it's a musical moment and Margot Kidder has to have her "Can you read my mind?" But you wouldn't be able to talk to each other if you were flying through the air like that. The wind and all the stuff. So
it'd be hard to just breathe.
I know. So it's got this, like, I don't know. I think it's a good balance. But I'm going to let you shit on this a little bit more.
I adored her thinking, "Can you read my mind?" Because she doesn't know. She has no idea. She's super fallen for this guy, which I think is going a little too fast. It's definitely like starstruck sort of deal. Because he's been around for basically literally a day at this point. Literally a day. No one's known about him, and all of a sudden she's talking about falling for this guy. So she's fallen way too fast. But he's holding her by the fingers, and she's soaring out beside him, and the second he lets go of those fingers, she falls like a sack of doorknobs. And no, like, if you're holding, it would have
been nice if she sort of flew forward a little bit, and then
when she's holding on to his arm and his arm alone, he's not holding on to her, and they're flying. No, you're gonna let go. You're gonna lose your arm strength at some point. When you're having your fingers held onto, that's not holding you up. Your fingers are gonna snap like a twig, and you're gonna go plummeting down into the ground. And it took me right out of it, in spite of the fact that the thoughts of telepathy was so fantastic. And that's what this film is to me. You have these fantastic things right beside this weird, dumb BS that makes no sense.
I think that really encapsulates Superman comics from the 50s to the 70s, though. There's a lot of fantastic stories, but there's so much BS, too. I mean, it's just, it's ridiculousness. Some of them are imaginary stories. Some of them are crazy, goofy sci-fi stories. It wasn't high literature. It was
Superman saying, "Hey, I'm going to end poverty by destroying the slums." And hopefully these dozen waifs are able to tell everybody about that in the 2 hours I gave them to do so. That is an early action comics Superman.
Oh, that would probably be like a 40s action comic Superman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which was a very different Superman.
And that's very dumb Superman.
That's something that I think is important with this movie, is that I think there is a timelessness to it, but I think there is also a very specific period quality to it. You know, for as much as people complain about Man of Steel, for example, that is a movie that very much sort of reflects the filmmaking of now and the attitudes of Superman, some people's attitudes of Superman now. I mean, there's a lot of people who would like to go back to this kind of Donner era of Superman, or just a very classic, real stand-up guy kind of Superman without the angst and but that's another movie.
It does feel a lot like 2001 in the sense that it's trying to inspire some sort of awe. It's trying to create a feeling more than it's trying to create a story for the most part.
But I think it's a fun story, and I think it's incredibly well written. I do. You know what? All right, this movie takes place in 3 parts. There's Krypton, there's Smallville, and there's Metropolis. So let's break it down into these 3 sort of component parts and just sort of build to kind of a conclusion. So Krypton.
Krypton I actually had the biggest problem with because everything there is janky.
Okay. Before we get into this, bear in mind, the red tone on your TV was cranked so high until we got to Smallville.
It might have made the shininess of the suits that much worse, but you know what? That's fine. I'm talking about just the theoretical concepts that they introduce, not the appearance of things. The fact that they're this super advanced, they're 2,000 years ahead of us, as stated by Jor-El's wife. And yet they don't have a single ship that anyone on the planet could possibly use to escape at any point in time.
But I think that was supposed to point out their hubris.
That could be hubris, but we have pleasure vessels. Like Richard Branson went up into space because he's rich and because he can. These guys are 2,000 years ahead of us. They have the technology to shoot their baby,
but they
3 light years.
But they don't know what's going on. They're like, no, nothing's happening, nothing. Jor-El was prepared. Jor-El had coordinates programmed into Kal-El's ship. He was like all set. As soon as the tremors started happening, he was like, hit that button, send the boy off.
And it's fine that you don't have an escape plan for the entire world. Like the Titanic
but
only had
else
so many lifeboats.
Is just wandering around, and the tremors start, and the sun is basically like expanding because it's going to explode or implode.
And nobody at any point is like, let's check out other planets, because we have these 28 known galaxies that we are observing from over here. Not a single one of them is a vacation spot. Not a single person is like, hey, I like to just go tooling around in space every so often.
It's entirely possible. And bear in mind, in this universe, a few years later, I think 6 years later, Supergirl appears. And that's explained where Argo City is separate from Krypton. So there could be other Kryptonians around, but I think the impression
there would have to be with all the Kryptonians who end up showing up in the comics.
I think, well, yeah, exactly. But I think the idea is that the Kryptonians, they may have the ability for star travel, but they don't do star travel because they think they're the bee's knees.
It's like 6th century Chinese who went all around the world and were like, China's better. Let's go back.
Yeah, exactly. And because everything's happening so fast, and because they weren't prepared, and because they didn't believe Jor-El, and because they didn't make preparations to get off-world, even if they did get off-world, they probably still would have been caught in the explosion of the sun.
They would have wrecked the hub of their civilization,
or they would have been lost somewhere. But like Kal-El's ship left the planet, went into hyperspace, and he cleared it. He was done. He was gone. I don't know. I have no problem with it.
I find that it's just a literary thing that wasn't really well thought out, and that now we're just forced to explain after the fact. And the thing is, like, it's 30s, 40s comics. Like, it's dumb stuff just made up and thrown out at you, and you're not meant to question it. So when we're forced to question it, because some asshole is being pedantic, then fans are left sort of saying, well, this, that, the other.
I think they give enough information. I think...
Especially when it takes them 2 seconds to send someone to the Phantom Zone for eternity.
So what did you think of, like, the look and the design of Krypton?
All I could think is, this is some sort of barren-ass wasteland.
It is.
And everything is done with crystals, which is definitely a 30s idea of what the future is going to look like. And all I could think of is Galaxy of Terror, Sid Haig, live by the crystal, die by the crystal.
Oh, that's why you said that.
100%.
I like it. I like the ice designs. I like the way the crystals and the ice kind of work together.
If it's ice. They give no impression of that. Everyone's just wearing the fancy little suits, and everything seems to be made out of crystal.
I think it's cool. I love the look of Krypton, actually. And I like the 3M suits. I know you thought they were a little ridiculous. The version we watched actually has a few extra scenes in the Krypton sequence where they include some of Jor-El's conversations with the Council, which, in my opinion, weren't absolutely necessary and were originally taken out for pacing reasons. But I like how they sort of flesh out kind of what's going on, and it gives you a little bit more Marlon Brando.
It feels like a bit of an explanation as to why they weren't prepared, as opposed to just, we had this escape rocket for our baby and that's it. Because that would seem really out of left field. I feel the explanation might have been weak, but it was at least something.
I also really like how this movie about Superman starts out in space. It starts on Krypton. Bear in mind that in 1978, when people were going to see this movie, like, they probably had a rough idea of what kind of the Superman origin was. I mean, he was popular and everybody kind of knew Superman, but I don't know how close everybody was in the popular, like, consciousness.
Comics weren't cool yet.
So you go to see a movie where they're like, you'll believe a man can fly, and the first thing you're seeing are all of these guys wearing these day-glow suits with ice and crystals, and Marlon Brando telling people shit's gonna go down, and guilty, and Terrence Stamp, all of your heirs. Like, you're sort of probably sitting there wondering,
what does this have to do with anything?
Yeah. But I still think it's so well written and so well directed and so well art directed, and it's very captivating, and I love the Krypton sequence.
And then it starts moving on towards the Smallville sequence. So you've got the whole flying through space, which is definitely a 78 view as to what that might look like. with their limited special effects. It doesn't look very good.
It's basically a bunch of like oils and dyes and water filmed and composited with star fields.
It didn't look like he was flying past or through anything. It looked like stuff was happening around him in a way.
It's very...
And he's spending this time listening to all this information. It's on these data crystals. I don't know what Kryptonian babies are like, but I sure as shit don't remember anything that happened in my life prior to being 5, so that might have just been a waste of 5 years. Luckily, he didn't have to eat or drink, and his oxygen didn't run out, or he didn't need it, so...
But he also gets, like, the 12 years in the Fortress of Solitude.
Now, that would be much more helpful.
So, and a lot of the stuff was, like, repurposed, so... maybe there was just... We're going to talk to you in your pod so you don't go crazy, but...
It's like baby Beethoven stuff. I mean, they've proven it doesn't work, but that's human babies.
In defense of the space stuff, it's very impressionistic. It's trying to keep you sort of interested in what is essentially kind of a montage-y bridging sequence. Yeah, it's just crazy lights and space stuff.
They didn't know any better, so what do you expect?
I didn't have a problem with it. I'm good with it.
I'm just saying it didn't age well. But you gotta go with what time it was actually made in, 78, and you forgive him for that.
I mean, part of our discussions when we get to the whole, masterpiece museum piece, it's not just like were the effects good for its time, but do the effects hold up? Do you watch it now and can you enjoy it now, or does it just all stand out?
Does it just pull you out of the film?
You can recognize, Metropolis was like cutting edge special effects for the time, but boy, do they look bad now, which they don't. They actually are surprisingly good, and that's one of the reasons why we talked about that movie the way we did and voted that movie the way we did. So I'm just kind of clarifying that saying a movie's special effects look good for its time...
It isn't a jab. The thing that is a jab is when I say that the special effects go from great to really bad. It's a very inconsistent thing, and that pulls me out of it sometimes.
Smallville. We're into Smallville now. We're away from Krypton.
And we start off with some child pornography, which apparently is okay in films and okay when you show people baby pictures, but make it a still on your computer and all of a sudden it's a crime.
I think it's context, Dustin. I think context is important.
Mostly I find it amusing that it's entirely PG to have a naked 6-year-old just standing there, but you age that person 12 years and all of a sudden that's NC-17 based on the ratings board, especially at that time.
I agree.
And that's why it was very surprising for me to see just, boom, naked kid. But that is neither here nor there. The whole Smallville sequence is the story we all know and have heard a billion times before, and to my understanding, hasn't really ever changed except for in, theoretical, what if Superman landed in communist Russia? It's
actually changed a lot since 38. Like, a lot. It only really started coalescing in, the 50s and 60s.
Well,
for a long time...
It's still the one that I'm aware of.
For a long time, it was I think Sylvia and... I can't even remember what the dad's name was. And it would be Jonathan and Mary, and it would go back and forth depending on whether you were watching it on TV or reading it in comic books or listening to it on the radio. There's a lot of stuff that they had to draw from. Like, when this movie came out, this movie... The comics kind of cemented it. This cemented it even more.
This cemented it in pop culture, not just
when shit comes out in movies, people are like, okay, that's the canon. For a lot of
and so we have the whole...
What's the word I'm looking for? The cultural context, I guess. The perception of the regular Joe, they see it in the movie. Like the Marvel movies now. There are people who are that's their only understanding of Marvel.
That's what popularized
And those are the lives of those characters. And if they were to read the comics, they'd be like, what? That's not how it happened.
Either way, it's a quick little jaunt through. Superman's told, gotta hide your powers, and eventually his dad dies and he can't save him. And he goes and he builds the Fortress of Solitude by throwing a glowing crystal into the North Pole somewhere.
It was really interesting for me watching that scene this time because there's been a lot of discussion about, Zack Snyder's Man of Steel recently in the last, 5 years, and the whole him not saving his dad in that movie. And nobody shits on him not saving his dad in this movie.
It's a big plot point.
Now, you haven't seen Man of Steel, so I'm not going to get... And we're not talking about Man of Steel, so I'm not going to get into details. But the way he doesn't save his dad in that movie is a little bit less kind of legit than in this movie. I mean, in this movie, he theoretically could have picked up his dad and, like, ran to the hospital, but chose not to because that would be a display of powers. It's not something they really get into because it's not something that was really an issue. It's kind of like a broad strokes bit of storytelling.
Though not that he didn't just race a train for a little while just a few minutes beforehand.
But then his dad has the conversation with him saying, you were put here for a reason, but the reason wasn't to be a star quarterback. Like, he kind of discourages him from these displays of his power. And it's something that actually comes back in that scene in the Fortress of Solitude with his real father, Jor-El, which this is the first time I really caught that kind of echo, and I really love the way that played, and it's why I really think that scene works, even though it was taken out of the theatrical cut.
I do like his going back over those crystals and spending 12 years just basically studying all the sciences and everything. So now we know that Superman is basically super genius, has all the knowledge of sciences and whatnot. Then he just chooses to be a reporter and lay low completely.
I really like... There's a poetry to the Smallville scenes. I think there's a poetry to the Krypton scenes as well. And I think because this is, like you said, it's basically an hour of exposition. I think because they're going through so much information, I think it's beautifully written. You know, the father dies, there's the funeral, and then he gets the crystal, and then he's looking up, and he's like, I gotta go north. And there's the beautiful, beautiful music by John Williams underscoring it. This is like one of the best film scores I think that John Williams has ever been involved with. The opening Planet Krypton music is, like, bar none, one of my favorite pieces of cinema music, and then the funeral music, right up there too. I like how they handle the two. I like how they tell the origin. It takes a good chunk of time of the movie, but for me, it just, like, flew by. I don't know if you felt a little more of the time passing.
We did check the time when they finally got to Metropolis, and it was at 50 minutes. And that's, of course, with the deleted scenes that they had. So let's say 40 minutes. To me, it felt like about a half an hour, and I felt like it was taking a long time. But it wasn't like a check your watch, sort of this is stupid taking amount of time sort of deal. Like, I'm somebody who gives Shyamalan a whole lot of crap for not being able to write dialogue and his entire movies being nothing but exposition. In particular, Last Airbender that he just destroyed. But this one, it was as well written as exposition can be. There was not really any character growth, it was just character introductions. And that's something you can do when you have a longer film. If you have something that's an hour and a half, you can't have the first 50 minutes be introductions. Especially since there's more introductions when we get to Metropolis, because now we've got to meet Jimmy Olsen.
Whole new set of characters.
Whole new set of characters. You're in a different locale entirely.
But did you notice also how the pacing of the movie just, like, went from 0 to 60, kind of? Like, Smallville was very slow and sprawling, very classic style of filmmaking, which, you know, really works because you've got Glenn Ford there, classic, you know, actor. I mean, it just... I love the way it kind of balances between cutting-edge special effects and sort of fantasy movie, fast-paced Metropolis, you know, shit happening.
I actually kind of disagree. That I don't think the pace picked up at all. They just moved to a different kind of exposition. Now instead of...
There's so little talking in Smallville, and the talking never stops in Metropolis.
But so much of what they're talking about is still exposition. It's still setting characters up. The one thing that isn't really exposition and that goes super fast and makes no sense is anything that has to do with Lex Luthor. But when you're talking about Clark Kent getting his job, yeah, they're talking a whole lot, but at the end of it all, it's basically, okay, Clark works here now, Lois Lane can't spell for shit. And
I love that about her.
I find that actually extremely depressing.
They didn't have spell checks at the time.
You didn't have spell checks, sure, but...
Doesn't mean she can't write, it just means that she doesn't know how many...
T's bloodletting has. Or that rapist only has one P. And she's supposed to be a top-tier journalist? Come on, Lois, come on.
That's what copy editors are for.
Either way, none of it is really character development, it's all character introduction. And when you get to the scenes where Superman is saving people, it's just introductions to his powers. You're just introducing more.
It's kind of the cinematic equivalent. It's like a glamour shot. It's like a vanity bit where it's like, let's have... Well, okay, I think it works narratively too, because it's Superman's first night where he's revealed himself as Superman, and he saves Lois, and he's like... Oh, that felt good. I'm not going to stop here. And he spends the rest of the night stopping crimes, saving cats.
And so it's a little clip show.
Saving the cat.
And the little girl gets smacked by her mom for lying.
It's the best.
Oh, it's terrible.
That whole sequence, which kind of starts with that guy going, "Woo, hey, Jim, that's a bad outfit, woo!" And then, like, the girl getting slapped in the face. Those are two just absolutely brilliant, beautiful moments in cinema for me.
Child abuse, a beautiful moment in cinema. You heard it first here. That is Mike's opinion.
But yeah, he goes out and he's like, it's like being... Imagine his life is just a really long road trip, and that night is when he gets to stop and get out of the car and finally, like, stretch out his legs and his back and just like, and he wants to just go run a few laps or something.
But the thing is, he just got out of 12 years in the Fortress of Solitude. That's pretty much day one. He's introduced at the office. Day two is, okay, let's figure out who this person is.
We don't know what's happened between him leaving the Fortress of Solitude and starting at the Daily Planet. There may be...
another job along the way.
There could be time in there.
He had to definitely get his resume out somehow and get hired, presumably.
But he gets hired. He gets onto the Daily Planet, introduced to new people.
And that first day is when that first night is when he saves Lois. And then that second night is when he sets up the date as Clark Kent and does another date as Superman. So the time is just really flying by there. It all takes place in like 3-4 days once you get to Metropolis.
After the night flight with Lois, I'm kind of getting a sense that there might be a little more time. Because you were saying, like, what, this has taken place over 3 days or a week? I think Superman may have been around Metropolis a little bit longer than that. I feel like the Metropolis stuff is kind of compressed, and... because there's a few people, Lex makes a comment where you pointed it out, where he sort of says, like, that's kind of your thing to do or whatever, and you're like, how does he know that? He's only been around for a few days. I think maybe there have been some Superman...
Yeah, he said that I want to take down everything he represents. It's like, dude, he literally showed up yesterday.
Yeah, but he did say...
What does he represent? You don't know his name yet. You're just assuming this stuff.
He did say in the article that he's there to uphold truth, justice, and the American way.
That was before the article.
No, he said that to her while she was taking notes.
Yeah, he did, but...
So she put that in the article.
Lex Luthor's comment was before the article. Before the night flight. That was the day after he appeared. He just immediately hated the Superman character, who didn't even have a name yet.
I'm going to give that one to you. We're talking about Luthor now. Something you said, it was either just before the movie ended or after the movie ended. There was nothing about this Luthor that you liked.
Except the very first scene where his idiot lackey is going to the secret base in the subway, and he's being followed by the cop who sees how to get in. And Luthor's like, this friggin' idiot. So he sets up this piston door to push the cop out in front of a train, which I thought was genius. That is a perfect way to get rid of the odd person who sneaks in there and finds something out. But after that point, what you're left with is this super egomaniacal loony and his two bumbling cohorts, one of which is the abused girlfriend, who he definitely beats, given that she says at one point, now I know I might get
wrapped in the mouth.
I might get wrapped in the mouth for this, but whatever. And
there's a very slapstick quality to Luthor and his cronies. But bear in mind, it was the mid-'80s when we got corporate Luthor. Luthor had been everything from kind of mad scientist to goofball to dude in armor to, whatever up to this point. Luthor was just kind of another villain.
He was a weird Batman rogue gallery shtick guy.
I'm okay with it because ultimately anything that I think is a little bit janky about this movie, I think it works within the internal consistency and logic of the movie.
Because it's not working with external logic at all.
Well, I don't watch this movie and go, this is the Superman of my comic books, or this is the Superman... I mean, I think Christopher Reeve is fantastic. He looks like Superman. It's one of the best Superman suits I think that's ever been produced.
100%. He is great as Superman, and even as Clark.
Yeah, but my favorite Clark is not the weird, clumsy, oafish Clark. So watching these Superman films, watching the Donner Superman films, you take the world that's given to you as is, and you either like it or you don't like it.
And as I said, as you said, I'm not super familiar with Superman. This is the second movie I've seen next to All-Star Superman, And all the rest I get just from random pop culture things here and there.
I'm sorry for making you watch All-Star Superman.
No, it had some good stuff in it, and I never apologize for making me watch a film.
It's a great story, but they just didn't adapt it well.
But Lex Luthor, like you're talking about internal logic, Luthor pretty much immediately starts declaring all sorts of weird nonsense about Superman that makes no sense. He's like, let's think about this logically here. If the planet Krypton exploded 3 light years away, logically, we probably have some fragments here on Earth, which is not logic at all, given how random those shots would be, but it's possible.
If Superman got here...
He was directed. He was on a ship that was specifically guided to get here.
He was. And, there have been future versions that have, either a piece of kryptonite went into the warp with him, or a piece of it got lodged onto his ship. It's whatever. It's all going in the same direction.
It's going in every direction, but given the amount of distance it has to travel, the odds of it hitting are near nil. But he could have said a piece might have hit here, so if we look at asteroids that might have fallen around that time, okay, so on and so forth, whatever, he gets the thing. But his declaration that this asteroid is radioactive and that's going to be lethal to Superman is so arbitrary and out of left field. It's like, where do you get this information?
Genius intellect. He is a super genius.
Yet he doesn't understand how radiation works. And he doesn't know how this superhuman body works, yet he's making these declarations.
So you're okay with the guy flying, having heat vision, X-ray vision, but you're not okay...
Because we don't know how that works. But
you're not okay with a piece of a planet...
That's your suspension of disbelief.
Hitting Earth.
I'm not okay with him declaring that logically a piece would have hit it without a doubt.
All right, fair enough.
Even if I were to aim a gun at the moon right now, by the time it got there, I'd be 7,000 million miles off. It would be ridiculous how far I'd miss.
Well, to be fair, if you were to shoot a gun at the moon, the bullet wouldn't have the velocity to actually get there. Even
if it went at light speed. Even if it was going at light speed.
I don't
if
know.
I shone a flashlight at the moon... The odds of me completely missing with the light particles.
You guys can't see it, but Dustin is doing these hand motions, which are just hilarious.
It's very important. I talk with my hands sometimes.
I'm okay with it. Again, I think it fits with the internal logic of the film. It's comic booky.
The internal logic that it's going with there is that they're 3 bumbling stooges, basically.
Luthor is not a bumbling stooge.
He's a bumbling stooge.
Luthor...
They're all bumbling. He has a plan that works. 100% it works. But he is effectively a bumbling stooge.
Okay, here's a question for you. You're not okay with Luthor coming up with the idea that, logically, a piece of Krypton would have come as a meteorite and landed on Earth somewhere.
And be poison to Superman, but also somehow not poison to us.
But at no point have you questioned, why are these the people that he surrounds himself with?
Which is part of why he's a bumbling stooge, because now, by making him the one smart guy with 2 bumbling stooges, they're all a bumbling stooge. It's a complete trope.
Stooge by association?
Pretty much. They're always together. They're basically always together, so they're one entity as far as I'm concerned. They're the 3 stooges. It doesn't matter if one of them is smart and whapping Moe and Curly on the head for being an idiot, or Larry. Doesn't matter which one is Shemp. It doesn't matter which one is Shemp. The fact is they're all stooges.
I've vacillated over the years. Loved it when I first saw it. There have been times where at different ages I've been more or less okay with it, where I've been like, oh, it's not my Luthor. Oh, it's funny. Oh, it sucks. I think a lot of the response to this movie is sort of how old you are when you're watching it too, which is really interesting to me. And I mean, I'm at the point where I've kind of, I'm okay with the silliness of this movie. I'm okay with the very slapstick. Slapstick is not an exaggeration.
Not in the slightest.
Nature of this story, because it also has some really great gravitas and pathos, and the cast does so much with their roles. Ned Beatty might be playing this bumbling fool, but little things like when he's talking about, Luthor's talking about finding the meaning of the universe on a gum wrapper, and you see Otis looking at his chocolate bar wrapper, hoping that he was going to find the meaning of the universe on it, or when Lex takes his hair off at the end and he's like, Lex Luthor, super genius, and they cut to Otis, who kind of looks at him, and he's just got this little expression.
The acting is great for the roles that they have, 100%. I would never shoot any of that down.
Like, they're owning it. They are fully invested, 150%.
Every single actor is fully invested. There's not a single part where I'd say they phoned it in.
And that's I think adds to the verisimilitude, to use Donner's ethos, catchphrase, of the film. And that's what I think creates that internal consistency that sort of runs through the movie, and there's a tone to the movie which is kind of playful, and it goes in a lot of different directions, but I don't think it ever betrays itself.
But then you have to take that verisimilitude and put it next to the comic book stupidity, and I'm going to go right to the ending here. Lois Lane dies, getting suffocated in a car because Superman can't save everybody all at once. He's doing a lot of saving a whole lot of different people. The special effects on the bridge are phenomenal, and then he's pushing up the molten core of the San Andreas Fault, which is dumb and looks stupid. But when he decides to go against his father's wishes and affect human history by spinning around the Earth so fast that it reverses time and then starting it back up again, that's dumb. But here's the thing. Even if you're just like, all right, he reverses time, he then lands beside Lois before the aftershock buried her. She says, okay, there was an explosion at the gas station, which means that the aftershock or the earthquake did happen, so he didn't stop the missile from happening. Yet this time she's not brought into the ground again. Did Superman reverse his own actions and thus the dam broke, but he decided not to save the people this time? Did he stop something somewhere, but not what caused the aftershocks that hit Lois, yet still causing the explosion which blew up the gas station? Like,
I will justify this.
There you go. Okay, hit me.
The trick is, how far do you go back? While you were talking, I was like walking it back in my head, and ultimately, I mean, the way the film portrays it, it seems like he took it just far enough back where her car is out of fuel and stopping, and she did mention the gas station and whatever, so like, oh,
so the missile does hit.
The missile does hit.
Which means the aftershock should have came and buried her right afterwards, but he left her there with Jimmy Olsen.
But maybe
so he didn't prevent anything.
But maybe he found a way to stop the aftershock cracking the road from reaching her before he flew down.
And it all just happened off camera, and we don't have to explain it because it's comic books turned into movies. And this is where, as I said, fandom trying to justify things after the facts with stuff that we aren't shown.
Well, no, you said going into the recording you were going to have to justify this timeline.
That's right.
So I'm coming up with an explanation that will potentially be satisfying to you.
It is not. Making up something that happens in an alternate timeline that they don't show, that doesn't satisfy me. We have to go with the evidence of what we have, and the evidence of what we have is that he just left her to fall into the crack as it comes by a second time. The only question I have is, did he duplicate himself, technically, during that spinning?
Well, see, that's what I'm saying, because if he duplicates himself,
then he still didn't save her. He just went down, said, hey, how's it going? And the aftershock hit again, and then she died again because he forgot to save her during that 10 minutes.
Well, no, because there's him who's going down in the fault line and doing all the stuff, but then he's unimpeded to fix...
Oh, yeah, as I said, he could have, but they didn't show that. They didn't show that. They didn't say that. They have no evidence that he did anything other than just land right beside her and say, hey, how's it going?
It's a 2.5-hour movie, man.
Yeah, so take the extra 30 seconds. You had Jor-El's head floating in the clouds telling him that he shouldn't be doing that, and then him arguing with it. Especially when you're cutting out... This didn't occur in the theatrical version, but Lex Luthor, for some reason, despite saying that Superman is invincible through no evidence whatsoever, had this little gauntlet of bullets and then heat and then freezing to not work on Superman, just so that we, the audience, can see his powers. That's all the scene was there for, and that was a waste. And they took it out, which was a good idea. Either way, I am ready to go on to final deliberations if you have no other attempts to defend the film in the parts which it needs defending, because there's a lot of great in it still.
I think I'm good. I think we could probably move on to the next segment.
You will travel far my little Kal-El. But we will never leave you, even in the face of our death. The richness of our lives shall be yours. All that I have, all that I've learned, everything I feel, all this and more I bequeath you, my son. You will carry me inside you all the days of your life. You will make my strength your own. See my life through your eyes, as your life will be seen through mine. The son becomes the father, and the father the son. This is all I can send you, Kal-El.
So, we've watched it, we've discussed it. Dustin, Superman the movie. Masterpiece or museum piece?
I believe this will come as a shock to absolutely nobody, but I would say museum piece. It is something that is very classic for its time. It's something that we're all very much aware of in good old pop culture, but it is all over the show in terms of consistency. The acting is very consistent, but the plot can be sometimes just very inane. I feel as though going in with... I was trying to think of how would somebody who knows nothing of Superman see this film? Try to take it away from anything that they might know. What it seems to me is just a flashy setup of here's Superman, here's his story, here's what he can do. Crap, we kind of have to have some sort of story in here, so let's get these bumbling idiots to go off, steal some missiles with their little money-making scheme. And it's almost like it's just sort of thrown in after the fact, whereas the crux of the story is, here's this guy, here's the introduction. For everyone else who does have an understanding of Superman, it's flashy lights and special effects, which are going to impress. Set the mood, set the tone, but not do too much with it. I think it does not hit the masterpiece at all, but it is firmly in the museum piece. It is something that goes in a museum. And as for Mike...
And I'm happy to say that after shitting on a number of classics over the last few episodes, and some movies that I even feel like genuinely bad for voting as museum pieces, I was honestly a little bit torn about this movie, but I am going to go with masterpiece because I think it achieves everything it sets out to do. I think it is really well written. I think it's beautifully shot. I think it's terribly well acted. It is a product of its time, but I think it exists beyond time. It's its own thing. I think it's still very watchable. It's still very entertaining, whether you're watching the theatrical cut or the extended cut, or, you know, I haven't seen the 3-hour television cut yet, which actually I might have watched it on television at some point, but it's been so long. Something I want to do. Yeah, I mean, I've been defending the movie the entire conversation here, so I have to go masterpiece. It's one of the best superhero movies I think ever made. It is in the top 5. It's probably in the top 3 of the top 5. So yeah, that's where I fall. I actually, kind of touching on our Lord of the Rings episodes where you guys kept talking about how maybe as an individual film it's not, a masterpiece, but as the 3 films being one story, it is an achievement and a masterpiece. Bear in mind, I think this movie works incredibly well on its own, but this movie was designed to be 2 movies. I almost want to challenge you to watch Superman 2.
As I said, this feels like an introduction.
Because there are payoffs in the second movie. There is Zod and Ursa and Non coming to Earth and dealing with, the Kryptonian stuff comes back, and the characters that we get introduced to, there are new stakes and there are new things going on. And
with all the introductions and the origin story out of the way, you can just have Superman being Superman and have the growth that you need as opposed to the introductions that you have.
So, I don't know. If your game maybe is like a bonus episode or something on the side, I'd be willing to go there just to see kind of what you think. But as it stands right now, Superman the movie 1 vote for yay and 1 vote for nay. Once again, we will have to agree to disagree.
I guess we can just agree to disagree.
And we'll have to set it up for our beloved audience to break this tie. Will we be throwing it up as a poll?
Sure. We haven't done it for a while, but yeah, let's throw this one up as a poll. So check out Facebook, check out Twitter. We'll throw up a poll on Facebook. Like for Museum Piece, love for Masterpiece. And on Twitter, it's like for Museum Piece and share for Masterpiece, I believe.
Can't you just set up an actual voting poll?
Oh, I guess. Yeah, I could. We'll just do that then. The other one gets us more clicks and shit.
You can also like as you vote. It's 1 extra click, which requires far less thought, presumably. If you care enough to vote, then you obviously liked it, presumably.
So let us know what you guys think. Check us out on the interwebs. We're on the social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We've got the WordPress blog. If you want to support the show, like and share us on the social media. Spread the word. Word of mouth, very powerful. It's kind of how we've gotten this far, I think, so far. And if you want to support the show in a more robust way, we do have a Patreon. Check it out at patreon.com/FYC show. We've got a number of award levels, everything from like $1 to $20, I think is the spread. And check that out if you're interested. It'll help us keep the lights on, broaden the show, be more regular. Sounds like we're eating fiber.
It's great encouragement for us.
And it's good encouragement. It makes us feel indebted. It's like...
There's a lot more guilt if we miss an episode, if we know people are actually listening to it.
So much more guilt.
Guilt us into being better.
So with that, we will take our leave of you guys. Join us next week when we will have some version of The Big Lebowski. If we can get the scheduling to work, we will have the guest on. If not, we have watched the movie. We will just do The Lebowski.
Which sounds like a dance.
It does sound like a dance. Should be a fun episode regardless. So check that out. And until then, thank you so much for joining us. I have been your humble host, Mike.
And I've been your egotistical host, Dustin.
Take care, and we'll see you next time on For Your Consideration.
Ta-ta. From the icy wastes of Krypton and the palatial FYC studios.